Take a moment. You're seated in a school auditorium, the kind with creaky folding chairs and a chalkboard looming at the front. It's a parent-teacher meeting for your grandson's elementary class, and you're there because you pick him up every day, rain or shine. The room hums with parents' chatter, the air thick with stale coffee and dry erase markers. You sit quietly, purse on your lap, heart warm with memories of carrying this family, paying for your son's college, sewing his clothes, making sure he never lacked. But then, your son stands, right in the middle of the meeting. His voice cuts through the noise, cold and loud. Mom, you don't need to be here. You lost your job. You're just a bother. Go home. We'll take care of our son. The words strike like a whip. Silence swallows the room, and you feel every stare, parents, teachers, even the janitor in the back piercing you. Your face burns, but you press your lips tight, forcing calm. Though your heart splinters, you've been laid off. Yes, after years balancing books for a small firm. But to hear your son call you a bother in front of strangers, it's a betrayal that claws deeper than you could have imagined. Your daughter-in-law, beside him, nods, her smile thin and smug, like she's savoring this. Your grandson, fidgeting with his backpack, looks away, his face tight with shame. You want to speak, to list every sacrifice, every late shift, every dream you buried, but shame chokes you. Leaving only silence, you rise, chair scraping the floor, and head for the exit. Whispers trail you, sharp and cruel. Is she broke now? One parent mutters. No wonder they want her gone. Another says, your son's voice carries, low but clear. To his wife, she's got nothing left. They think you're worthless, that your layoff means you're empty. They're wrong. What they don't know, what they never cared to see, is the fortune you've built. Stocks in a tech startup, now soaring, a rental apartment, earning steadily, all hidden behind your thrift store coats and modest life. They think you're living off them, but the apartment they call home, it's in your name, and they're plotting to take it, believing you're too weak to resist. You step into the empty hallway, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, your shoes echo, each step heavy with pain. Then, through the half-open door, you hear it, your son's voice, smug and certain. Once she's gone, the apartment's ours. We can sell it, start fresh. Your daughter-in-law's laugh, sharp as glass, follows. You freeze, hand on the wall, and a fire ignites inside. They think they've erased you, that they've won. They're clueless about what's coming. You've given them everything, your youth, your savings, your heart. Now, you're ready to stand tall, not for revenge, but because you know your worth, even if they don't. Let's step back, close your eyes, and think of a time when love meant sacrifice, when every choice you made was for someone else. That's where I'm taking you now, to the years that shaped me, the years I gave everything to my son, hoping he'd see me the way I saw him. Those days feel like a lifetime ago, but they're etched in me, every moment a thread in the tapestry of who I am. And yet, even as I poured my heart into him, I was quietly building something else, something no one, not even him, ever suspected. I was 25 when I became a single mother. My husband, God rest his soul, passed from a sudden illness, leaving me with a toddler and a pile of medical bills. We lived in a cramped apartment, the kind where the walls were thin and the heater rattled all night. I didn't have a college degree, just a high school diploma and a stubborn streak. So I took what work I could, cleaning houses by day, waitressing at a diner by night. My hands were raw, my back ached, but I didn't care. Every dollar went to my son, to his clothes, his books, his future. I'd come home at midnight, feet throbbing, and still sit by his bed, watching him sleep, promising him the world. There were moments I thought I'd break. Like the winter I sold my mother's gold necklace, the only heirloom I had, to pay for his school uniforms, or the time I skipped meals for a week to afford his soccer cleats. Smiling as he ran onto the field, never letting him see I was hungry, I gave up dreams, Two wanted to be a nurse once, even took a few classes. But the cost was too high, the hours too long. My son needed me more. So, I let that go, tucked it away like an old photograph, and kept moving forward. For him. He was a bright kid, full of promise. At 12, he wrote me a letter for Mother's Day, his messy handwriting spelling out, "I'll take care of you someday, Mom, I'll make you proud." I kept that letter in a shoebox, pulling it out on hard days, believing it meant something, even when he got older. Drifted a bit, forgot to call, skipped visits, I held onto that hope. He was busy, I told myself, building his life. I didn't ask for much, just a nod, a thank you, a sign he remembered. But even then, I wasn't just a mother scraping by. I was smart, careful. While I worked those double shifts, I listened. Customers at the diner, regulars with money, talked about investment stocks, real estate, things I didn't understand at first. So, I taught myself, read library books on finance, saved every spare penny. I bought a few shares in a small tech company, nothing fancy, just a gamble. And when I had enough, I put a down payment on a tiny rental apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Month after month, I added to it more stocks, more savings, a trust fund I never touched. I didn't tell anyone, not even my son. It wasn't about pride, it was about security, about knowing I'd never be a burden, no matter what. I lived simply, always, wore secondhand clothes, drove a beat-up car, kept my apartment sparse. My son never asked why, never wondered. He assumed I had nothing, that I was just getting by. And yet, I paid off his college loans without a word, covered his wedding, no questions asked, even bought the apartment he and his wife live in, putting it in my name to keep things safe. They thought it was a gift, not a strategy. They never saw the strength behind my quiet. There were hard days, too, times I was sick, flu, bad knees. You name it, and I'd drag myself to the clinic alone, never telling him. Didn't want to worry him, didn't want to be a weight. Once, I spent a night in the ER, heart racing from exhaustion. And when I called him, he didn't pick up. I told myself he was busy, that he'd call back. He didn't. But I kept going, kept hoping, because that's what mothers do. We hold on, even when it hurts, looking back. I see it clearly now. Every choice, every sacrifice, was a brick in the foundation of his life, but also mine. Those quiet investments, that rental income, the trust fund, they weren't just money, they were power. Proof I was more than what anyone saw. My son, his wife. They never looked deeper. They thought I was small, dependent, a shadow in their lives, and yet, standing here now, after everything, I know the truth. I gave him the world. But I kept something for myself. Something they'll never expect. You ever feel like you're carrying a weight so heavy it might crush you, but you keep going because it's all you know? That's where I was, trudging through days that felt like years, each one piling on more hurt, more rejection, until I hit a wall I couldn't climb. After my son's words cut me down in front of everyone, I thought I could hold it together, keep my head high, and move on. But the days that followed, they weren't just hard. They were suffocating. Every step felt like wading through mud, and every glance from my family pushed me further to the edge. I was still their mother, their grandmother, but to them, I was becoming invisible, and yet, even in the darkest moments, something inside me refused to break. It started small, the kind of slights you try to brush off. I'd show up at their apartment, the one I'd bought for them. Mind you, hoping to see my grandson, maybe share a meal. But my daughter-in-law would barely open the door. Her voice clipped. "We're busy," she'd say, not even looking at me, "maybe next time." The door would shut, and I'd stand there, hands empty, feeling like a stranger. My son was worse. He stopped calling, stopped texting. When I did see him, he'd barely glance up from his phone, muttering about how I should figure things out now that I was out of work. They thought I was useless, a relic they could shove aside. They didn't know about the investments I'd made, the rental property I owned, the trust fund growing quietly, to them. I was just a woman who'd lost her job, nothing more. But it wasn't just the coldness, it was the way they erased me. My grandson's school play was coming up, and I'd always been there. Front row, clapping loudest. This time, no invitation came. I found out later they'd told him I was too busy to come. Too busy I'd sewn his costume last year, stayed up all night stitching stars onto a wizard's robe. When I asked my son about it, he shrugged. Didn't think you'd care, he said. Eyes on his laptop, my daughter-in-law chimed in, her voice dripping with pity. You've got enough on your plate. Don't you? I swallowed the hurt, nodded, and left, but inside, I was screaming. They were rewriting my place in their lives, making me a ghost. The isolation grew sharper. I'd visit, and they'd treat me like a servant. Can you clean up while you're here, my daughter-in-law would ask, pointing to dishes piled in the sink. I'd do it, thinking it might earn me a smile, a moment with my grandson, but no. They'd eat dinner without me, leaving me to scrub plates alone, while their laughter echoed from the next room. Once, my grandson called me Ellen instead of Grandma. His voice casual, like I was just some neighbor. I froze, sponge in hand, the word cutting deeper than I could say. My daughter-in-law smirked, as if it was nothing. I kept scrubbing, but my hands shook. I was fading, piece by piece, in my own family. Then came the whispers, the ones that broke something in me. I was at their apartment, folding laundry they'd left scattered, when I overheard them in the bedroom. My son's voice was low, urgent. Once she's out, we can sell this place, get a bigger house, start over. My daughter-in-law laughed, sharp and mean. She's got nothing to fight us with. Just get her to sign it over. I stood there, a towel half folded in my hands, my breath caught in my chest. They weren't just pushing me away. They were planning to strip me bare, to take the apartment I'd paid for, the one in my name, thinking I was too weak to stop them. They didn't know about the stocks I'd bought years ago, now worth a fortune. They didn't know about the rental income I'd saved, the trust fund I'd built. They saw me as nothing, a burden to be discarded. The final blow came at my grandson's birthday. I'd spent days picking out a gift, a telescope, because he loved the stars. I wrapped it carefully, wrote a card with all my love. But when I arrived, my daughter-in-law blocked the door. We don't need your charity, she said, her voice ice cold. You're not part of this anymore. My son stood behind her, silent, not meeting my eyes. I handed over the gift, my hands trembling, and watched the door close. I stood on the stoop, the wind biting, and felt the weight of it all the years, the sacrifices, the love I'd poured out crash down. I walked to a nearby park, sat on a bench, and stared at families laughing, playing, living. I was alone, truly alone, watching a life I'd built slip away. And yet, in that moment, something shifted. I looked at the gift's wrapping paper, crumpled in my bag, and saw my grandson's name in my handwriting. I thought of the letter he wrote me years ago, promising to make me proud. I thought of the fortune I'd built, the strength I'd hidden. I'd given them everything. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I stood, the cold air filling my lungs, and felt a resolve harden inside me. Enough was enough. They thought they could erase me, but they didn't know who I was. Not really. Sometimes. You hit a point where the world expects you to crumble, but instead, you find a strength you didn't know you had. That's where I was, standing at the edge of everything I'd built, ready to turn the tables after months of being pushed aside, treated like a shadow in my own family. I'd had enough. My son and his wife thought they could erase me, take what was mine, and leave me with nothing. They thought I was weak, broken, a woman with no fight left. They were wrong. And now, with every ounce of resolve I'd buried deep, I was about to show them exactly who I was, not with anger, not with shouts, but with the quiet power I'd held all along. It started the morning after my granddaughter's piano recital, the one they'd barred me from. I sat at my kitchen table, the card I'd written for her still in my purse, my coffee growing cold, the pain of that night the closed door, the words, "You don't belong here anymore," still burned. But something else was rising, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I pulled out a box from under my bed, one I hadn't opened in a while. Inside were bank statements, investment records, property deeds, all the proof of the fortune I'd built over decades, stocks in a tech company, now worth hundreds of thousands, a rental house across town, paid off and earning steady income, a trust fund growing silently, and the apartment my son and his wife lived in, the one they wanted to sell, titled squarely in my name. They thought I was penniless, living off their charity. They had no idea I didn't act right away. I needed a plan, one that was sharp, deliberate, and airtight. So, I called an old friend, Clara, who'd been my bookkeeper years ago before she became a financial advisor. We met at a quiet cafe, the kind where the hum of conversation masks your own. I spread out my documents, and her eyes widened. "Ellen, you've been sitting on a gold mine," she said, flipping through the pages. "They don't know any of this, do they?" I shook my head. She leaned in, her voice low. "Let's make sure they never forget it." We spent hours strategizing, mapping out every step. Clara knew a lawyer, a sharp woman named Diane, who specialized in property disputes. I set up a meeting, bringing every record, every receipt, every proof of my ownership. Diane's office was small but tidy, with a view of the town square. She listened as I recounted everything: my son's public humiliation, their plan to sell the apartment, the way they'd treated me like a servant. Her pen moved quickly, taking notes. "They're banking on your silence," she said, her eyes steady. "But you've got the upper hand. The apartment's in your name, and your investments give you leverage. We can stop them cold." She drafted a letter, formal but firm, notifying my son and his wife that any attempt to sell the apartment was illegal without my consent. It also requested a meeting to discuss their tenancy. I read it over, my hands steady for the first time in months. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I didn't send the letter right away. I wanted to face them first, to see their eyes when they realized their mistake. So, I asked Clara to arrange a meeting at her office. Neutral ground. I invited my son, his wife, and, to their surprise, my granddaughter. I wanted her there, not to hurt her, but because she deserved to know who her grandmother was. The day came, and I walked into Clara's conference room, a folder of documents under my arm. My son sat across from me, arms crossed, his face a mix of irritation and confidence. His wife leaned back, her smirk faint but present. My granddaughter fidgeted, her eyes darting between us. I took a breath, my voice calm but unyielding. "I've given you everything," I began, looking at my son. "Your education, your wedding, the roof over your heads. I never asked for thanks, never flaunted what I had, but you thought I was nothing, that you could take what's mine and cast me out." I opened the folder, sliding copies of the deeds and statements across the table. Their eyes widened as they read stock portfolios, rental agreements, the trust fund, the apartment title. My son's confidence faltered, his hands gripping the papers. His wife's smirk vanished, her face paling. "This apartment," I continued, "is mine. You've been living in it, planning to sell it, thinking I'd just sign it away. You were wrong." Clara spoke next, her voice steady. "Ellen's assets are substantial. She's been supporting you for years, more than you ever knew. Any move to sell her property without consent is fraud." Diane, who'd joined us, added, "I've prepared legal steps to protect Ellen's rights. You'll need to vacate the apartment unless she allows you to stay." My granddaughter looked up, her eyes wide, a mix of confusion and awe. I met her gaze, softening my voice. "I did this for you, too, sweetheart, so you'd know your worth. And mine," my son stammered, his voice weak. "Mom, we didn't know, we thought—" His wife cut in, her tone desperate. "We can work this out." "Right. We're family." I held up a hand, silencing them. "Family doesn't erase family," I said. "I gave you a home, a life, and you tried to take mine, I'm not here to beg, I'm here to take back what's mine. The room was still, the weight of my words settling like dust. I stood, leaving the documents on the table, and walked out, Clara and Diane behind me. My heart was steady, my steps sure. Outside, the air felt lighter, like I'd shed a burden I'd carried too long. They thought they could break me, but they didn't know the strength I'd built, the choices I'd made. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I'd given them everything, but now I was reclaiming my power, my truth. And they were about to learn what that meant. There's a moment when the dust settles, when the truth you've laid bare starts to reshape the world around you. That's where I found myself, standing tall after showing my son and his wife the fortune they never knew I had. I'd spent years giving them everything, my time, my money, my heart, only to be cast aside like I was nothing. But when I revealed the stocks, the rental property, the apartment they lived in, all in my name, their world tilted. They thought they could take it all and leave me broken. They were wrong, and now. The consequences of their actions were unfolding, not with cruelty, but with a quiet, undeniable justice that spoke louder than any shout ever could. The days after that meeting in Clara's office were a whirlwind, but I moved with purpose. My lawyer, Diane, sent the formal letter to my son and his wife, outlining their illegal attempt to sell the apartment and demanding they vacate within 30 days unless I granted them tenancy. I didn't want to throw them out, not really, but I needed them to understand. This was my home, my legacy, and they couldn't just take it. The letter hit them hard. My son called me that night, his voice shaky, stumbling over words. Mom, we didn't mean it like that. We didn't know you had all this. Can't we talk? His wife got on the line, her tone softer than I'd ever heard, almost pleading. We're family, Ellen. We can fix this. Right? I listened, my heart steady, and said simply, I gave you everything. Now I'm giving you freedom from me. I hung up, not out of anger, but because I meant it. They needed to face the truth of what they'd done. Within a week, they started packing. The apartment, once filled with their laughter and my granddaughter's toys, became a maze of boxes and strained silences. They couldn't afford to stay, not without my support, and they knew it. The rental income they'd assumed was theirs. Money I'd funneled to them for years was cut off. They found a smaller place across town, a modest rental that stretched their budget thin. My son took a second job, his pride stung, while his wife scrambled to make ends meet. They weren't destitute, not by any means, but the comfortable life they'd taken for granted was gone. They'd built their world on the assumption I had nothing. And now they were learning how wrong they'd been. The ripples spread beyond their home. Word got around, as it does in a small town. Neighbors who'd overheard their harsh words at that public event months ago now whispered about their greed. They tried to take her home, one said at the market, after all she did for them. Another added, my granddaughter's teacher, who'd seen me at every school event, pulled me aside one day. I heard what happened, she said, her eyes kind. You're stronger than they ever gave you credit for. Even my cousins, who'd been at that humiliating gathering, called to apologize for not stepping in. The community's judgment wasn't loud, but it was clear my son and his wife had crossed a line, and people weren't quick to forget. My granddaughter was the hardest part. She didn't understand everything, not at 10 years old. But she felt the shift, one afternoon. She showed up at my door, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes red. Nana, why are we moving? She asked, her voice small. I sat her down, made her cocoa, and told her the truth. Gently. I love you, sweetheart, and I always will. But your parents made choices, and now we all have to live with them. You'll always have a place with me. She hugged me, her arms tight, and left a note before she went home. I'm sorry. Nana. I love you. I kept that note. Tucked it beside the letter her father wrote me years ago. A reminder of what still mattered. My son and his wife tried to mend things, but it was different now. They invited me to dinner, their new place cramped but clean, their faces tight with forced smiles. "We're sorry." "Mom," my son said, his voice low. "We didn't know how much you'd done for us." His wife nodded, her eyes avoiding mine. "Can we start over?" she asked. I looked at them, the boy I'd raised, the woman he'd chosen, and felt a pang of sadness, but also peace. "I forgive you," I said. My voice calm, but trust takes time. "You'll have to earn it." They nodded, silent, knowing I meant it. I wasn't shutting them out, but I wasn't giving them everything anymore, either. They'd lost that privilege. I didn't revel in their struggle. That's not who I am. But there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing justice had been served. Not with vengeance, but with truth. They'd lost the apartment, the ease, the community's respect, because they'd tried to take what wasn't theirs. And me, I'd reclaimed my place, not just in their lives, but in my own. The fortune I'd built, stocks, rentals, savings, wasn't just money, it was proof of my strength, my foresight, my worth. I'd carried them for years, but now they'd carry themselves, and I'd walk my own path. As the weeks passed, I felt lighter, like I'd shed a weight I hadn't known I was carrying. I'd given them a chance to see me, really see me, and they'd failed. But I hadn't. I'd stood up, spoken my truth, and taken back what was mine. My granddaughter's note stayed with me, a spark of hope that maybe, one day, she'd understand. For now, I was enough. I'd always been enough. And that was the real victory. There's a quiet beauty in finding your way back to yourself. In discovering that, even after the deepest pain, you can build a life that feels like home. That's where I was, months after the storm with my son and his wife, after the truth of my fortune turned their world upside down. I'd spent years giving them everything, my savings, my dreams, my heart, only to be pushed out like I was nothing. But when I stood up, revealed the wealth I'd hidden, and took back what was mine, I didn't just reclaim my power, I reclaimed me. And now, standing in the light of a new chapter, I've learned what it means to live for myself, to find peace in my own worth, and to carry a hope that's bigger than the hurt. I moved into a small cottage just outside town, a place with a porch swing and a garden I'd always dreamed of tending. It wasn't grand, but it was mine, paid for with the rental income I'd saved over the years. Every morning, I'd sit with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the flowers I'd planted, roses, daisies, a few wildflowers for my granddaughter. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to kids after school, their wide eyes and giggles filling a space in my heart I thought had closed. I joined a knitting group, too, meeting women who'd faced their own battles, their laughter and stories a reminder that I wasn't alone. My days felt full, not with the weight of others' expectations, but with the joy of choices I made for myself. The loneliness that once gripped me was gone. I'd spent so long tying my worth to my son, to his family, that I'd forgotten who I was outside of them. But now, I saw it clearly. I was the woman who'd built a fortune from nothing, who'd raised a child alone, who'd faced betrayal and come out stronger. My wealth, stocks, rentals, savings wasn't just money. It was a testament to my resilience, my foresight, my ability to keep going when the world said, stop. And in this new life, I found a freedom I hadn't known I needed, a lightness that came from knowing I was enough, just as I was. My son and his wife were still out there, living in their smaller apartment, working harder than they ever had. They'd call sometimes, their voices cautious, asking to meet. I'd agree, but on my terms, keeping the distance I needed. My granddaughter was different. She'd visit, her backpack bouncing, and we'd sit on the porch, talking about school, stars, anything. She'd ask about the past, her eyes curious. And I'd tell her stories not of pain, but of strength, of the grandmother who never gave up. Her note, the one she wrote apologizing, stayed on my fridge. A reminder that love could still grow, even through cracks. I thought a lot about what it all meant. about the years I'd given and the lessons I'd learned. I realized my worth wasn't in what I could give others, but in who I was flaws, scars, and all. And if I could find that truth after everything, then maybe others could. Too, to anyone watching, feeling unseen or cast aside. I want you to hear this: you are enough. Your value isn't in what you do for others, but in the heart you carry, the strength you've built, the life you choose to live. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Stand up, claim your space, and know you're worth it. This story's been a journey, hasn't it? From pain to power, from loss to freedom. If it's touched you, if you've ever felt like you weren't enough, leave a comment below, share your story, I'd love to hear it. And if you know someone who needs this, someone who's struggling to see their own worth, send this their way. Let's spread this message, this truth, that we all deserve to stand tall. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this. And stay with me. There's always more to tell.